more pressure tonight calling on Boris Johnson from his former aide Dominic Cummings.
Yeah, absolutely. Boris Johnson his coat is on the sugariest of pegs, isn't it? I mean, we've heard from Dominic Cummings tonight saying that he knows categorically that Boris Johnson knew about the party that he claimed he stumbled upon. Well, I'm not sure how much word Dominic Cummings' word is worth. I think what we're really looking for just now is waiting to see what the Sue Gray report into all the parties in the Downing Street, Gardner and Downing Street I actually meant. But also, crucially, I think it's almost the reaction to that from the Cabinet. If we start to see Cabinet resignations, then I think Boris Johnson is toast at that point. That's what we're all looking for. But one thing they have to be absolutely sure of, if they start doing that, can they be sure that if the 54 letters go into the 1922 backbench committee calling for that vote of confidence, can they win it? Because remember what happened with Theresa May. The letters went in, there was a vote of confidence and she won it and she was safe for a year. They were stuck with her. They don't want that to be the case this time. And sure,
an awful lot of store being laid by this report by Sue Gray. Are you concerned that the Cabinet and the Prime Minister himself is laying so much store by it? Does that make you suspicious at all?
Yeah, it does make me suspicious, but I think that there's two outcomes here. Either the Sue Gray report is completely damning of the Prime Minister, as we know would be deserved, and people say, well, he has to go, or the Sue Gray report turns out to be a whitewash, and people say, well, it's a stitch-up, it's a whitewash. We trust the evidence of our own eyes and ears, and I, in this case, do trust the evidence of Dominic Cummings, because umpteen people were emailed about that party. Are you really telling me none of them said, are you sure this is maybe a good idea? So I think either way, all this nonsense, the phrase Sue Gray has almost like lost all meaning. It's been uttered so many times. I don't think it actually matters at this point what is reported. We all know what's gone on and people are furious about it.
And Peter, do you think the government has maybe done enough to push this far enough down the line that the anger might have dissipated somewhat by the time this comes out?
Oh, I think some of the immediate heat has been dissipated to a degree. I mean, there was no new revelations in the Sunday papers yesterday, but I think the much-awaited Sue Gray report still has the potential to be explosive for Number 10. I mean, I think any suggestion that the Prime Minister has knowingly misled Parliament, I think, is terminal. I mean, I think, as Colin says, that would immediately trigger Cabinet resignations, I suspect, if Boris Johnson didn't stand down himself. So, I mean, I think there is still immediate danger, but I think there is also long-term danger on the basis of, if May's elections are a disaster, then I think also that brings the pressure, heaps the pressure back on Boris Johnson. So, short-term, medium-term and long-term, Boris Johnson has a problem.
And of course, the Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross called on Boris Johnson to resign. He was insulted by Jacob Rees-Mogg, has been lightweight. And that's all led to calls, or perhaps refired calls, that the Scottish Conservatives ought to think about setting up their own separate party from the UK party. So what do you make of that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, this is a discussion that's been running for probably long on 20 years now. I mean, I take the view, and have done for the last over a decade, that it was always going to be an inevitable consequence of devolution that this kind of development eventually came to pass. I mean, I think there is a lot of the conversation about it just now. The Douglas Ross Boris Johnson spat has only made it ever more likely, in my view. The only question in my mind is whether it happens in the short term, or how much more damage is inflicted, over the coming months and years if it's delayed further. I mean, I think there is some disagreement still. There's not yet quite a consensus on exactly what form that increased distance means. So I think the next few weeks and months will help thrash that out internally. But I think this is inevitable. I think it's just, it was always going to happen. And in my mind, for the centre-right cause in Scotland, the sooner it happens, the better.
And sure, it would be rather ironic if the Unionists Scottish Conservatives split from the Unionists UK Conservatives.
Indeed, what sort of message does that really send about sort of common interests and common political orientations throughout the UK. It's an interesting one because when Murdo Fraser suggested this back in 2011, I mean, he wasn't the front runner. It was Ruth Davidson who was expected to win and who did win the leadership. And so I suppose for me, it seemed like a slightly niche idea, whereas now, obviously, it's very much to the forefront. But I wonder if the Scottish Tories would see that as a permanent solution to what I think everyone agrees at the moment is a temporary problem. If you say that the entire problem is Boris Johnson and those around him, whereas I don't know if that is the sum of the problem, but it's certainly the acute one. And they will also be waiting for the Sue Gray report, not to see what it says, but to see, as Peter says, what is the domino effect of that going to be? Are there going to be resignations? Is Boris Johnson going to go? And can Douglas Ross breathe a sigh of relief?
And briefly on that point, Shona, does Douglas Ross have to do something?
Well, he could go into some kind of voluntary self-isolation like Boris Johnson has, just to avoid having to speak to anyone. But I don't think we're going to see him do that. I think he's in a very difficult position at the moment. I'm not sure what I would do if I was him, other than sit tight for another week or so.
Peter, you were wanting to come in there.
No, I was just, I mean, Shona highlights a really important question. I mean, I don't see this, and I don't think those who are making the case for it within the Conservative Party, I don't think they see this as a tactical solution to a short-term problem. I think that would be a mistake. I think what this is now bringing to the fore is the need for a strategic long-term reassessment and realignment of the centre-right in Scotland. This is not, in my book, a short-term problem, a Boris Johnson problem. This is about an inevitable consequence for the long term of devolution in Scotland.
And Colin, what's your sense of how strained relations are between Scottish Conservatives and UK Conservatives?
Oh, there's no doubt they are more strained right now than they have been, well, certainly when I can remember. I mean, it's unprecedented that you have the Scottish Conservative leader calling on the UK Conservative leader and Prime Minister to quit. I mean, I think in that one interview, Douglas Ross probably proved that politically he's a much more substantial figure than Jacob Rees-Mogg with his throwaway insults. I thought they were truly appalling. I'm not convinced by what Peter's saying, though. I don't think this is inevitable. I think the Scottish Conservatives, once Boris is out of the way, will be quite happy to stick with the UK Conservatives for cash, if nothing else.
And of course, Colin, last year in the Scottish elections, the Conservatives, certainly in terms of votes, Scottish Conservatives did as well as they've ever done.
Absolutely, and Boris Johnson was absolutely nowhere to be seen during that campaign, and very, very much deliberately so. It wasn't just because of COVID, it was because the party in Scotland knew that he was a vote loser in Scotland. One of the things that Boris Johnson promised his party was popularity, and down south he delivered on that in spades until now. It's never been the case in Scotland. He's never been a popular political figure in Scotland. It's almost as if people in Scotland found him out before the rest of the country. That seems to have been the way with the Scottish Party. You know, before we had Operation Red Meat and Operation Save Big Dog, we had Operation Arse in Scotland, where the people in his own party, led by Ruth Davidson and others, tried to stop him becoming Prime Minister. They managed it the first time, but they failed the second time.
Peter, what might a new party be called?
Oh, well, I think that's, if I might say that, that's probably detail. I mean, I've always taken the view that actually, were this to happen, which I think, you know, for the good of Scottish politics would be a good thing, it's about more than a rebranding exercise. It's actually got to be about a fundamental realignment of the centre-right in Scotland, and so that people who are currently don't see themselves as Conservatives would see themselves as finding a natural home within it, and probably some people who are currently Conservatives would perhaps see themselves as not finding a home in this new centre-right force. In my view, it's not about name, it's not about brand, it's not a change of logo, it's a fundamental realignment. And that's where I see it as being fundamentally different from some of the discussion about it that's come, you know, over the last 20 years or so.
And briefly and finally on this point, Shona, would it make any difference, do you think, to the independence debate?
It would be very interesting to see how a new Scottish Tories sort of positioned it, because it almost seems like they're kind of jumping the gun and setting up their independent party before independence.